In the first century when Jesus was alive, actually something very connected to what Kirk just said. The land of Israel was controlled by the Roman Empire. They were the superpower that was in charge. And they had an ideology. It was called the Pax Romana. It means Roman peace. They wanted peace in their empire. And largely, they achieved peace. Do you know how they achieved peace? Say it. Violence, force, strength. Peace through strength. They had military bases all over the empire, including in the other nations that they conquered. Roman soldiers policed all of those lands. If you're walking the streets of Jerusalem or Capernaum with Jesus, you would notice Roman guards everywhere. And when there were uprisings, what did the Roman military do? They acted swiftly with overwhelming force to bring peace. Sometimes using the method of crucifixion to eliminate hundreds of people at a time. Peace through strength. That ideology is commonplace in our nation and in our world still today. But what we're going to discover is that the way of Jesus is utterly different. It's another one of my quarterly current events Sundays, or I also put out there to the church asking if anyone has any questions. And on these Sundays, my goal is to apply biblical theological teaching to the issues of the day or to the questions that people ask. And I received the following question. What would it take to allow the love of Jesus to bring peace to America? It's a great question. And in fact, there's a lot to that question. First is the word allow. What would it take to allow the love of Jesus to bring peace? I appreciate that the question mentions the word allow because it recognizes the importance of free will. Jesus himself is not going to force his will on people anywhere, in America or otherwise. Jesus preserves free will. He does not coerce. I'm very, very glad for that. He will entice, he will woo, he will interact, and he will speak, but he will not make us choose against our will. That's what love looks like. Love welcomes. It pursues, but it does not coerce or force. Jesus is love. And so when it comes to allowing the love of Jesus to bring peace to America or any other place in the world that needs peace, it is human beings who must choose to allow the love of Jesus to be primary. And because we're talking about the love of Jesus in particular, that means we're talking about people who believe that the love of Jesus is actually a real thing, that it's an important thing. Who are the people who believe in the love of Jesus as a real important thing? His followers. We call them Christians. Christians are people who not only believe in Jesus and his ways, such as his love, Christians are also people who are actively involved in a relationship with Jesus, desiring to become more like him, to think like him. And then those Christians are the people who not only believe and think, but their actions look like him, like his actions. Both inwardly and outwardly, Christians are people who are striving toward that end. Now, because this question is asking what we can do to allow the love of Jesus to bring peace, this question is talking primarily to Christians. Now, clearly, we Christians do not have a corner on the market when it comes to love. Any human can express love. It's part of the image of God. God is love, and we humans are made in the image of God. And so therefore, any human can express love, whether they're Christian or not. And I suspect that nearly every human who has ever lived has expressed love in some form or another. But this question mentions something specific, the love of Jesus. That's a very particular kind of love. The love of Jesus is something that we Christians should encounter and demonstrate extremely lavishly, precisely because we are his followers. Jesus is God, and God is love, and so it follows that Jesus is love. We have 4 books of the Bible that tell the stories of Jesus, and in those 4 books, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we can see the love of Jesus in action all over the place. Jesus himself talked about love quite frequently. Furthermore, the writers of the New Testament go to great lengths to comment on the love of Jesus. So in the New Testament, we Christians have a lot to go on if we want to learn to live the love of Jesus. But again, we must choose to do so. We must choose to allow his love into our lives so that it then flows out of our lives. Importantly, I think, allowing ourselves to encounter and express the love of Jesus starts with humility. It says, I need more of you, Jesus. It's saying, I don't have your love all figured out, Jesus. Maybe I need to learn more about it. Maybe I need to live your love more day by day, hour by hour, through the moments of my life, maybe a lot more. It says to Jesus, teach me your love so that I might love like you love. That allowing of the love of Jesus to saturate our lives starts with that humble posture. It means that we allow Jesus to be our teacher, our guide, our mentor. Allowing the love of Jesus to bring his peace to our land starts with us. It requires vulnerability. Let yourself be loved by him. Accept the astounding gift of his love in your life. That's where it starts. So back to the question, what will it take to allow the love of Jesus to bring peace to America? As we're examining each part of the question, I wonder if you're starting to see an answer take shape. The answer has something to do with Christians, followers of Jesus, freely choosing to make the love of Jesus the pattern and practice of their lives. But what about those who are not Christians? Can we force them to believe and practice the love of Jesus? We could try. But do we want to? No. Free will says that we don't want to force people to believe in or follow Jesus. We want them to be free, not coerced. That's the beauty of the freedom of religion. And since this is a question specifically about America, I'll mention America now. The United States is a place where all religious views are free to believe and practice their own unique point of view. In other words, the Christian theology of free will supports and encourages the rights of people to not be Christian. I'm not saying that we agree with the theology of every other religion. I'm saying we support their right to be different. That's freedom. And as a result, when the question mentions Jesus' love, Christian love means that we do not become belligerent or aggressive if there are people in our country who do not agree with Jesus' whole mission, or that the fact that he is God, or that his particular kind of love is what they want to live their lives by. If we want the love of Jesus to bring peace, we need to live with love, even toward those we disagree. Just look at the example of Jesus. The only people he became aggressive to were people claiming to be God followers who were legalistic and unloving. It's primarily the Jewish religious leaders. Jesus, in other words, was only aggressive towards those in his own religious family. Now, that said, the kind of love that Jesus lived his life by, the kind of love he taught, is astounding. Even atheists commend Jesus' love as of a very pure quality. And I suspect that many people, even if they're not Christians, see that and can admonish that as something to follow. So, the question's focus on Jesus' love, I think, would hold true for nearly everyone. And that brings us to the final part of the question, peace. In recent years, we have seen lots of unrest in the United States of America. I would argue that the amount of unrest we have seen, though, pales in comparison to other eras in our nation's history. Can you imagine what it would have been like to live during the Civil War? We're nowhere close to that. The current unrest also pales in comparison to unrest that is happening currently in many other places around the world today. So let's keep that in mind. It's helpful to have perspective. And with that perspective in mind, I still think we need to ask the question, do we need more peace in America today? Yes, we do. To talk about how to allow the love of Jesus to bring peace to America today, I thought first of all about simply re-preaching my Purple Church sermon from years ago. Some of you were here when I preached that. It was 2020. Talk about unrest. Remember 2020? It was awful. 2021, not much better. But in the summer of 2020, we were dealing with the COVID lockdown and all the massive disagreements about it. We were dealing with ethnic conflict. It was that summer that George Floyd was killed. Many, many other African Americans had been shot. There was lots of upheaval. Guess what? It was also an election year. Remember that election year? It was brutal. The intensity of the primaries, the conventions, the millions of political ads. It was a bitter contest. And so I preached a sermon about how in the church, we are neither red nor blue. We're Christians, first and foremost. Jesus is our King. We pledge allegiance to Him. And the church is a family where red-minded people and blue-minded people put the peaceful love of Jesus far above political ideology, and they practice loving unity. Red and blue together make purple. I think that message holds true 5 years later. One of the goals that we have at Faith Church is to be a purple church, a church family where red and blue mix together in unity, focusing on that which is much more important than red and blue, the love of Jesus that brings us unity and peace. How do we do that? How do we mix when our culture has for years become more and more divided? How do red and blue have peace? Talk about that in just a moment, but first, Purple Church is just about the church. The question actually that I received this week was, how do we allow the love of Jesus to bring peace to America? It's talking about the wider society. It's not just the church. And that's a much more difficult task because I'm preaching in the context of our own church family about what it will take to bring peace to the wider society in America. But I was asked to talk to our church family. I'm not talking to America. How can we, Faith Church, allow the love of Jesus to bring peace to the people that we interact with? You and I rub shoulders with a variety of people every day. It's our neighbors, our coworkers, family members, friends. What will it take to allow the love of Jesus to bring peace in the communities, workplaces, schools, homes where you and I actually live? That's what we focus on. We may never be able to affect the entire country, but we can affect where we are now. And maybe that will slowly weave its way outward. How do we do it? Turn in your Bibles to Philippians chapter 2. Chris mentioned this earlier. Verse 1. Philippians 2, verse 1. It is page 951 if you're reading from one of the Pew Bibles. I think in this passage, Jesus gives us a very clear answer that is so different from the ideal of peace through strength. What you will hear in this passage is Jesus' response. Philippians chapter 2, verse 1, starting in it's at page 951. Paul writes this, "Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, by being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross." That's the answer. Some of you know I recently published my doctoral work in my book, and in the book I talk about how sin, from a togetherness perspective, is selfishness. Selfishness is a very American way of thinking. We are culturally conditioned to believe in the power of one, in individualism, and in personal responsibility. It's not all bad, but it's the idea that I can do it myself. I work alone. I need to do this on my own. I talk about the Pixar movie, Mr. Incredible. His famous phrase is, "I work alone." So American. We tend to think that there's something less about me if I have to ask for help. There's something wrong with me if I can't just figure it out on my own. Those are individualistic ways of thinking. And again, they're not all bad. There is something to be said for personal responsibility, for learning new things, trying new experiences, for stepping out of your comfort zone. You've heard me harp on that one over the years. I believe we need to step out on our own, start a new business, travel to a new place, volunteer in a new ministry, sing a new song. So glad that Chris introduces us to new songs. Discipleship to Jesus is hampered if we never try new things. And that adventure, that experimentation, requires that an individual strike out on their own, take a risk, and go for it. And when we do, we learn, we grow. Even when we fail, we learn through it. And sometimes I think maybe we grow as individuals more quickly and more deeply when we fail, if we have the humble teachability to learn from our mistakes. So suffice it to say, individualistic goals and achievement are not all bad. But, especially here in America, we have the temptation to elevate individualism far too high, as if individualistic focus is the most important thing in life. And that individualistic way of thinking can have a negative effect on how we view the world, including how we think about God. If our view of our relationship with God is primarily about me and God, or it's too much about me and God, then I might miss out on how God views the mission of his kingdom. Now, let me step back and say, we humans, we just cannot possibly have a complete view of God. There is a sense in which his ways are higher than our ways, and that we need to humble ourselves to that. But we can have a much more complete view of God by pulling Jesus out of our pockets where we sometimes hide him and allow him to show us how he views the world. Philippians 2 that I just read does just that. Jesus also does that in the Gospels very clearly. But here in Philippians 2, I think we have a powerful summarization of the way that Jesus thinks. And I think it is the precise answer that we need to the question, how do we allow the love of Jesus to bring peace to America? If sin is selfishness, salvation is selfless. Let me read these verses again, and I want you to notice the movement in the passage. Look at the movement. There's two kinds of movement in this passage. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. What direction is the movement? I think you can describe it in two ways. The movement is from in to out, and it is from up to down. Let's take a look first at the in to out movement. In verses 1 through 4, Paul is talking about relationships in the church. In verses 1 and 2, the theme is unity. In verses 3 and 4, the theme is humble otherness. I would argue, therefore, to achieve unity and humble otherness, two incredibly important qualities that are needed for peace, we must have a viewpoint that looks outward. What I mean is this: we cannot expect that others will look toward us. That would be outside-in movement. That's when we expect others to support us, to think like us, to give to us, to serve us. That's when we expect others to bend to us. If we expect others to bend to us, then the focus is really on us. And worse, we are much less likely to think that we need to serve them or support them or give to them. Unity requires that the individuals in the church primarily have an outward focus. Unity requires us to ask, how can I help, serve, love, give to the others in the church family? Who is hurting? Who is marginalized? Who is oppressed? Who is difficult? Who is struggling? Who do I not want to be around? Who ticks me off? I give myself to serve them. We don't wait for them to come and ask to be served. We actively keep our eyes open and we observe. We seek to put ourselves in their shoes, to try and understand their perspective. What are they going through? So that we're the ones that take the initiative to serve them. Paul uses a word there, like-minded. He's using a word about attitude. He's not saying that we all have to have the exact same ideologies. We have the same attitude, though. Having the same attitude is especially important because there will be so many times when we do have different ideologies. It's normal for a church family to have people who think differently about politics, who think differently about how to handle situations in the community, who think differently about how to be the church. It's normal. But unity is when we are willing to have a Christ-like attitude while we live in community together, even when we might have a disagreement about ideology. That is in to out movement. That is looking outward. That is being concerned for the people around us. In addition to movement that heads outward, in verses 4 through 8, Paul describes the second movement, and that is downward. Our attitude should be the same as that of Jesus, and Paul said Jesus moved down. Started at the top, in heaven, the pre-existent Christ, the second person of the Trinity, God the Christ, living a perfect life in heaven. It gets no better than that. Why would he ever want to leave that? But Jesus was willing to give it all up and move down for us. The movement of verses 4 through 8 is consistent downward movement. Jesus just keeps lowering himself, emptying himself. From heaven to earth, he took on a body. God took on a body. It's kind of wild to think about that. God took on a body. Talk about downward movement. What a downgrade. For God to leave heaven is one thing. For God to dwell on earth is another. Now, we hear stories about God's visiting earth. It's all through the various religions of the world, and it's not so sacrificial. But the one true God leaves heaven, comes to earth, takes on a human body. And the downward movement doesn't stop there, because Jesus is willing to go to the cross and die. God dies. That's the most astounding thing in this whole passage. The downward, self-sacrificial love of Jesus. That's how we, as individuals and together as a church family, express ourselves to the community around us to bring peace. The approach of Jesus to answer this question is to follow his example of sacrificial love. During the 3 years he spent with his disciples, he taught that love. He called them to look outward, beyond themselves, to others. He called them to look downward, to help those who were below them in society, who were forgotten and oppressed. And then he himself gave his life and did it. And because that's precisely what he did, we follow his example. We follow what he taught them. He said to his disciples, "Die to yourself." And so we take on his heart, his attitudes, his sacrificial ways, and we serve others. That's how we allow the love of Jesus to work in us and through us as individuals and together. To bring peace to our community, we sacrificially give of ourselves to love the people and the community around us. Now, I'm not saying this is a guarantee that if we just love enough and we love rightly, then we're guaranteed to bring peace. No. But that sacrificial love of Jesus is the answer. It is the pattern. It's how he brought peace. Jesus pursued people with love. He welcomed people with love. He sacrificially gave his life with love. He spoke truth and matched his words with kindness and sacrifice. Peace comes through looking outwardly, beyond ourselves, and being willing to go down, to share ourselves sacrificially, especially with those on the margins, the oppressed, the mistreated, the poor, the hurting. Jesus came to bring the peace of his kingdom. It is a much richer, deeper, holistic peace than the Pax Romana or any other pax that any nation could try to bring. For Jesus, it is not peace through strength. It's peace through sacrifice. Sacrificial, relational, costly love. So who do you need to love with that kind of selflessness? Who ticks you off? Who do you dislike? Who do you have a problem with? Who do you think differently than? Where is there a lack of peace in your life? How can you lovingly reach out to the person who has the bumper sticker on their car or the banner in their yard promoting an ideology you disagree with? If we want to bring peace in our land, Jesus teaches us that it starts with us. It starts when we pursue peace through sacrificial love like he did. I recently heard the story of a Christian man. He's an author that I really appreciate. He told the story that he was at a park. He was with some Muslim friends, Muslim family in his area that he'd been getting to know. And there they were in the park, and they were enjoying the park, and all of a sudden his Muslim friends started getting nervous, real nervous, antsy. They noticed something happening across the way in the park, and they wanted to get out of there. And the guy was like, "What's going on?" Was it ICE? Did they see people maybe coming to arrest them? No. It was an evangelism team. It was a group of Christians who were going into the park to, quote unquote, share the gospel. And the Muslim family told this Christian man, "I had a bad encounter with them a couple days ago. I need to get out of here now." And the Christian man was saying, "Well, but, it's okay." And the Muslim guy said, "No, it's not. I got to go." And they left. So often we Christians, with a desire to bring peace through Christ, do so the wrong way, culturally inappropriate way. Jesus teaches us that the proper way is sacrificial love, where we give ourselves for the people that maybe we struggle with the most, the people that we think differently, people that are on the margins of society. I'm not saying that that will be an automatic answer to bring peace even to our local community, but it is the way of Jesus. And so let us ask ourselves how we can follow his way. I think the Christian man who was building a relationship with that Muslim family was actually doing the right thing. He was trying to give of himself sacrificially to get to know that family and love them. And it was going well. That's the kind of peace that we need to bring.